They fired me. No warning. No conversation. No thank you for the record-breaking quarter my team just pulled off. Just a man in a suit standing in front of my desk, telling me I wasn't what the company needed anymore. But what he didn't know, what no one in that office knew, was that I owned 90% of the company, and I was just getting started. This isn't just a story about being underestimated. It's about legacy, about power hidden in silence, about a daughter whose father left her not just a company, but a chance to rise, rebuild, and remind the world what real leadership looks like. And yes, about revenge. But not the kind you think. It was a Thursday morning. I remember because the office smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls. Lisa from HR always brought them in on Thursdays. I had just finished reviewing the quarterly sales data. Up 18%, our best numbers in 3 years, when the door to my office flew open. No knock, no courtesy. Just Martin Ree, our new CEO, striding in like he owned the air in the room. "Jessica," he barked, tossing a folder on my desk. "We need to talk. Now." I looked at him. Tall, sharp suit, sharper ego. The kind of man who never remembered your last name unless he needed coffee or a cover story. I nodded slowly and gestured to the seat across from me. But he didn't sit. "We're restructuring the leadership team," he said. "And frankly, we need visionaries. People who can lead. Not just manage spreadsheets." It stung, but not for the reason he thought. Not because I needed the job, but because I realized in that moment he hadn't seen me at all. Not even once. Started like any other Thursday. The office was calm, the soft hum of keyboards filling the air, and Jessica sat in her corner office, sunlight spilling over her desk as she reviewed the quarterly growth reports. Numbers were up, 18% increase to be exact. Her department had just delivered the strongest quarter the company had seen in years. She had barely taken a sip of her coffee when the door swung open. No knock, no greeting. Martin Ree, the new CEO, walked in like a storm. No smile. Just a man on a mission. "Jessica," he said curtly, tossing a folder onto her desk. "We need to talk. Now." She blinked, confused. "Of course. Have a seat." But he didn't sit. He just stood there, looming, commanding, as if the room belonged to him now. "We're restructuring the leadership team," he said. "We're moving in a different direction, and frankly, we need visionaries. People who can actually lead." Jessica's chest tightened. "You're firing me." Martin smiled, cold, smug, satisfied. "Let's not be dramatic. We're simply releasing you from your position. Effective immediately. No conversation. No review. No acknowledgement of her work. Just a dismissal wrapped in corporate buzzwords and a forced smile." She sat still, her heart beating steadily. Not out of fear but clarity. She had worked in that company for 12 years, built teams from scratch, mentored junior staff, delivered success after success. And now, all of that was being erased with a single sentence. And here's what stung the most. It wasn't just that she was being let go. It was the way it happened. No respect. No gratitude. No humanity. Martin didn't care that she had once stayed in the office overnight to meet a critical deadline, or that she had stepped in to manage a client crisis when no one else would. He didn't care that her leadership had built the very foundation he now stood on. To him, she wasn't a leader. She was just a name on a chart. Many women, and even men, have been in Jessica's shoes. Overlooked, dismissed, treated like they were replaceable, even after years of loyalty and impact. It's a quiet kind of pain. Not the loud, messy heartbreak of betrayal, but the sharp sting of being invisible in the very space you helped build. And if you've ever felt that, you're not alone. Here's the small lesson Jessica learned that day. And maybe it's something you need to hear too. Sometimes they don't see your worth, not because it's not there, but because they're not capable of recognizing it. And that has everything to do with them and nothing to do with you. So Jessica stood up, shook his hand with a grace he didn't deserve, and walked out of the office with her head high. But what no one in that room knew was that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. And 2 floors down, tucked inside a locked drawer in her apartment, was a letter from a man who always believed in her, one that she hadn't been allowed to open until the day she turned 35. Let's go back a few weeks, to the day Jessica's life changed forever. "Jessica, you lack vision," Martin had said, as if the words were objective, final, factual. "You manage tasks, not people. And leadership requires strength, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly demonstrated." He said it without flinching, without even realizing what he was really saying. But Jessica did. She'd heard those lines before, so many times from so many mouths, dressed up as feedback, framed as constructive, but always meaning the same thing. "You're not loud enough. You're not aggressive enough. You're not what a leader looks like, because you're not a man." What Martin failed to mention was that Jessica had been leading the company's most innovative product line for the past 3 years. She had managed a cross-functional team of 32, steered them through a supply chain collapse, and still delivered a 22% increase in gross profit. But to him, none of that mattered. She didn't lead like he did. So in his eyes, she didn't lead at all. Jessica didn't argue. She didn't protest. She thanked him, nodded politely, and walked out of the building. But as she stepped into the elevator, cardboard box in her arms, she felt something burning inside. Not shame, not sadness, quiet storm, still steady rage. It wasn't just personal, it was systemic. According to a recent report from McKinsey & Company, women in corporate leadership roles are 1.5 times more likely than men to receive feedback describing them as too soft or not assertive enough. And yet, they are also 2.5 times more likely to be penalized for being too assertive when they do speak up. It's a double bind, one Jessica knew all too well. She remembered pitching a bold expansion idea during a leadership meeting 6 months earlier. Martin had dismissed it as too risky. But when a male colleague repeated it 2 weeks later, almost word for word, it was called visionary. Jessica had smiled in that meeting. She had nodded. She had taken notes. But inside, she had never forgotten. Here's the quiet lesson Jessica took away that day. Bias rarely announces itself out loud. It shows up in performance reviews, in passed-over promotions, in boardroom interruptions, and words like fit and presence. Learn to hear what they're really saying, and never confuse their short-sightedness for your lack of value. So no, Martin didn't fire Jessica because she was underperforming. He fired her because she didn't fit his mold, because she wasn't loud enough, brash enough, or eager to flatter him in every meeting. But that would be his greatest mistake, because the very person he dismissed was the one holding the keys to everything he thought he owned. Back at her apartment, Jessica placed the cardboard box gently on the floor. She poured herself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and reached for a drawer she hadn't opened in years. Inside was a single envelope, cream-colored, handwritten, with her name in familiar ink. It had been sealed by her father before he passed, with one condition: do not open until your 35th birthday. And 2 weeks ago, she had finally turned 35. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because of what it carried inside. Jessica sat in her father's old reading chair, the same worn leather seat by the window where he used to sip tea and read every Sunday evening. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar, like memory itself. She turned the envelope over in her hands. The ink had faded slightly over time, but her name was still clear. Jessica Renner, written in the steady, elegant script she knew by heart. And beneath it, 4 words in capital letters: to be opened at 35. Her birthday had passed just 2 weeks earlier. But between late-night work meetings and the looming tension with Martin, she hadn't found the right moment. Till now. She peeled the envelope open carefully, as if opening a time capsule. Inside 2 things: a folded letter and a formal-looking document with a gold seal. She unfolded the letter first. It was handwritten, no email, no printout, just ink on thick cream-colored paper. Jessica, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've turned 35. Happy birthday, sweetheart. You've always worked harder than anyone I know, twice the effort for half the recognition. I saw the sacrifices you made, even when you thought I wasn't paying attention. I also saw the company change after I stepped down. I knew there might come a time when you'd be pushed aside, not because of your ability, but because of your grace. So I made a choice. I didn't want to hand you power. I wanted you to grow into it, to know what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, and still rise. Let them think you don't belong. Let them doubt you. Let them reveal themselves. Then when the time is right, show them who you are. Jessica felt a lump form in her throat. Her fingers trembled as she set the letter down and reached for the second paper. It was a notarized trust agreement. According to the document, her father had retained 90% of the company's shares when he stepped down, and placed them entirely under her name, held in trust until her 35th birthday. Effective immediately. She stared at the numbers. 90%. Not a minority, not a partner. The majority shareholder. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power, clarity, and purpose. She called Mr. Harrington, the family's longtime attorney, barely able to get the words out. "Is this real?" she asked. He smiled through the phone. "It's very real, Jessica. Your father structured it quietly to avoid public filings. The board has no idea. Unless you choose to tell them." She let out a long breath. Her entire career she had played by the rules, waited her turn, hoped that hard work would speak louder than office politics. But now she understood. She hadn't lacked time. She had lacked leverage. And suddenly she had all of it. Here's the lesson her father gave her, wrapped in paper and love. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is belief. Not in their brightest moment, but in their darkest one. Because belief, when it arrives exactly when it's needed, can bring a person back to life. Jessica stood from the chair, the letter pressed against her chest. She wasn't just walking back into that building. She was walking into her future, with the full weight of legacy behind her. And Martin, he had no idea what was coming. Jessica didn't fight back. No raised voice. No HR appeal. No desperate email to the board. She simply smiled, shook Martin's hand, and walked out with her head high. From the outside it looked like defeat. But inside it was the beginning of something far more powerful. Martin didn't follow up. He didn't ask questions. In fact, he seemed relieved. He walked through the office that week with even more swagger, already boasting about fresh leadership and new direction. He told the board she had gracefully exited, and even joked that she might go start a yoga retreat. And Jessica, she let him believe it. She didn't respond to HR's exit interview. She didn't correct the rumors. She simply disappeared, quietly. But every moment of her silence was deliberate, because now she had leverage. "Let them think you're done," she wrote in her journal. "That's when they're most exposed." It wasn't bitterness. It was strategy. Jessica knew something most people forget. You don't win power by shouting over the noise. You win by knowing exactly when to speak, and when to wait. She spent the next few days meeting with Mr. Harrington, reviewing her legal position, preparing documents, and gathering data. Caroline, the trustee of her father's estate, was already digging up everything Martin had hidden behind polished quarterly presentations. Inflated projections, declining employee satisfaction, misuse of company funds. And all the while, Martin remained blissfully unaware, because Jessica wasn't making noise. She was making moves. This kind of silence isn't weakness. It's what real strategists use when they're about to turn the game. Steve Jobs did it when he was pushed out of Apple in 1985. He left quietly, observed, built something better. And when he came back in 1997, he didn't return for revenge. He returned to rebuild. And so would Jessica. Here's the quiet truth she had learned. Not every reaction needs to be loud. Some of the most powerful shifts happen in silence, because silence doesn't mean surrender. It means you're preparing something they'll never see coming. And on one quiet Friday morning, as the sunlight streamed across her apartment floor, Jessica placed a final call to her attorney. "I'm ready," she said. The papers were signed. The meeting was scheduled. By Tuesday morning, she would no longer be the woman they fired. She would be the majority shareholder walking back through those doors, with more power than anyone ever imagined. While Martin strutted around the office like a king unchallenged, Jessica was in a quiet cafe downtown, sipping a flat white while Mr. Harrington, her family's attorney, reviewed the final draft of a document that would change everything. A formal request to call a special shareholder meeting. Single agenda item. Leadership review and the appointment of new executive management. It was precise, strategic, legal, and once delivered, it would act like a grenade, tossed straight into the heart of the boardroom. Jessica didn't want drama. She wanted clarity, and facts would do the talking for her. That's why she spent the next 72 hours digging. With Mr. Harrington's legal team on one side and Caroline Winters, the trustee of her father's estate, on the other, they began building what Jessica jokingly called her case file from heaven. But there was nothing funny about what they found. Employee satisfaction had dropped 38% in 2 years. Turnover in key departments had spiked 47%. 3 formal complaints about gender bias and leadership favoritism were sitting, untouched, in HR's queue. Revenue growth flatlined despite a booming market. And Martin, he had been spending more on executive wellness retreats and luxury travel than on R&D. Caroline slid a folder across her desk one afternoon with a sigh. "He bought a yacht," she said flatly. "With company money. Registered it under an executive perks shell account." Jessica blinked. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about boats," Caroline replied. Then after a pause, "You don't owe this man your silence anymore." Jessica read through every page, every expense report, every internal survey and audit that had quietly been brushed aside. What she was holding wasn't just evidence. It was truth. And truth, when prepared correctly, is one of the sharpest weapons in the world. Here's the lesson she learned in the stillness before the storm. Before you walk into battle, don't just come with anger. Come with facts. Come with clarity. Come with everything they hoped you'd never find. Because when your words are backed by proof, they can't be ignored anymore. Mr. Harrington closed the folder, adjusted his glasses, and gave a small nod. "It's all here," he said. "Once this is delivered, the board has 5 business days to comply. Are you ready?" Jessica smiled, calm, composed, unshakable. "I've never been more ready." The papers were signed. The notice was drafted. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Now all that was left was to walk back in. Before we step into the boardroom with Jessica, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been overlooked or underestimated at work, even when you knew you were giving it your all? How did it make you feel? And what would you have done in Jessica's shoes? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. Now, back to the moment everything changed. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and clear. Jessica stood in front of the building she used to walk into every day, once as a department head, now as the majority shareholder. She wore a navy suit, tailored perfectly to her form, and carried nothing but a sleek leather folder. No theatrics, no entourage, just quiet, controlled presence. Upstairs, the boardroom was already buzzing. Martin was in the middle of presenting his quarterly outlook, slides full of color, jargon, and projections he had no intention of delivering on. The board nodded, half listening. It was the usual, until the door opened. Jessica stepped in. Every head turned. The air shifted. Martin stopped mid-sentence, blinking in disbelief. "Jessica," he scoffed. "This meeting is for board members only." She smiled gently and walked to the head of the table. "Exactly," she said, placing a set of documents in front of each board member. Then she sat down, not at the side, of the head. Martin's voice sharpened. "What are you doing?" Jessica looked up, calm and clear. "I'm here as the majority shareholder. And I've called this meeting under my legal rights to review current executive leadership, including the role of CEO. A silence swept across the room. You could hear a pen drop. Board members glanced at the documents. Mr. Dalton, one of the original directors, adjusted his glasses and read the numbers slowly. "Is this accurate?" he asked. "It is," Jessica nodded. "My father's trust transferred 90% of the company's shares to me on my 35th birthday. It was structured to remain confidential, until now." Martin's face flushed red. "This is a coup," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "A personal vendetta." Jessica didn't flinch. "It's not a coup. It's accountability." She opened the second folder, thicker, heavier, and began sliding copies around the table. Inside, employee satisfaction down 38%. Turnover up 47%. 3 pending HR complaints. A misuse of executive funds. Yeah. And beside every figure, Martin's initials of approval. The room shifted again. Mr. Dalton looked troubled. The CFO leaned into the general counsel, whispering. The head of compliance quietly began taking notes. And Martin, he looked smaller. All his bravado, his control, his dominance. It didn't hold up in the face of documented truth. "You relied on the idea that no one powerful enough would ever question you," Jessica said. "That ends today." Then she pulled out one final document. "I'm submitting a motion to remove Martin Ree as CEO of this company. As the majority shareholder, my vote is sufficient to carry the motion." The board secretary, stunned, looked up. "You don't need a second," Jessica simply replied. "I own 90%. A majority by any definition." And just like that, Martin's reign was over. He stood for a moment, shaking with rage. But he didn't resist. Security wasn't called. He simply walked out, silent, red-faced, defeated. And the moment the door clicked shut, the room exhaled. Jessica looked around the table, her voice softer now. "This company deserves better. So do its people. And starting today, that's exactly what they're going to get." Here's the truth Jessica proved that morning. When you bring together truth and legal power, you don't have to demand respect. You command it. Because there is no louder voice in the boardroom than a woman holding the facts and the votes. Jessica didn't move into the CEO's office right away. She didn't need the bigger desk or the corner windows or the fancy nameplate to prove anything. Instead, she walked the halls. Listen. Took meetings with interns, receptionists, night shift custodians, engineers, and department heads, some of whom hadn't spoken freely in years. She asked one question over and over again. What's not working, and what do you need to thrive? And then she did something radical. She acted on what they said. Within 2 weeks, the People First initiative was launched. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise. No more layers of ego between frontline voices and leadership. No more pretending that only executives had ideas worth hearing. Jessica completely restructured HR. Files that had been gathering dust, ignored complaints, overlooked feedback, buried evaluations, were read, audited, and taken seriously. And some changes happened fast. Maya, a quiet but brilliant customer service rep, had been unofficially managing the entire client experience pipeline for nearly a year. Her manager took credit for every innovation she introduced. He even blocked her promotion twice. Jessica brought her into a meeting, listened to her insights, and made the change official. "You're not acting like head of client experience," Jessica said. "You are head of client experience." Maya cried, then smiled, then got to work. Kevin, a senior developer who had quit months earlier after being passed over by less qualified male colleagues, received a call from Jessica personally. "I was wrong to let you walk away," she said. "We need your vision back, and this time you'll be leading." Kevin returned as Director of Product Innovation. On his first day back, someone wrote in dry erase marker on the glass wall, "We missed the good ones. Now we bring them home." 4 years, the company had felt stuck, like it was running in circles instead of forward. the truth. It wasn't for lack of talent. It was because the voices that carried real solutions had been silenced. Under Martin's leadership, only the loudest were heard. Only the ones who mirrored his style got promoted. And in the process, the company lost its heartbeat. Jessica believed something different. Innovation doesn't live in corner offices. It lives in the people doing the real work, if you care enough to ask and brave enough to listen. That's what People First was all about. No more whisper networks. No more glass ceilings. Just good people doing great work, finally seen, finally valued. And here's the big truth she uncovered. Culture is not a poster on a wall. It's not a mission statement. It's how people feel when they walk through the doors. And that, more than revenue, stock price, or flashy leadership, is the soul of a company. One afternoon, as Jessica passed by the break room, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Laughter. Photos taped to cubicle walls. And in turn being high-fived by a senior manager. The building felt alive again. And this time, it wasn't about power. It was about belonging. Jessica didn't move into the CEO's office right away. In fact, for the first few weeks, it sat untouched. Lights off, the door closed, still bearing the old nameplate that had already been removed from the building's directory. She had no interest in claiming space. She wanted to reclaim something much harder to rebuild. Trust, connection, culture. So instead of sitting behind a desk, she walked the halls. She stopped by the marketing bullpen and asked about the intern's first campaign. She shared coffee with the finance team in the break room. She sat in on a product brainstorm and quietly praised a junior designer whose ideas had been overlooked for months. No cameras, no announcements, just presence. And then, one afternoon, as she passed the engineering zone, she paused. On the whiteboard near the corner was a single sentence written in blue marker. She came back, underlined twice. No signature, no explanation, just those 3 words. Jessica stood there for a moment, reading it over and over. Not she took over, not she fired Martin, just she came back. It meant something deeper than victory. Meant home. For a long time, the company had been missing something. Not talent, not tools, not strategy, but heart. Under Martin's reign, employees had learned to stay quiet, keep their heads down, to meet expectations, but never dream beyond them. They didn't need another boss. They needed someone who understood what it felt like to be invisible. Someone who'd been there, who'd been underestimated, dismissed, and still came back with compassion instead of ego. Here's the truth Jessica carried with her into every room. Leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the one who listens and then lifts. Real leaders don't occupy space. They create it for others to grow. By the end of the month, something had changed in the air. People started staying late again, but not out of fear. Desks bloomed with plants and Polaroids. Feedback sessions were filled with voices that had been silent for years. The company wasn't just rebuilding structure. It was healing. And one quiet Monday morning, Jessica finally walked into the CEO's office. She didn't bring much. Just a single framed photo of her and her father, standing outside the first office building 25 years ago. 2 smiles. One legacy. One of Jessica's first decisions as CEO wasn't about numbers or strategy. It was about people. The right people. She knew that a new culture couldn't grow in old soil. And that meant rebuilding the leadership, not just from the top down but from the inside out. So she looked beyond resumes, beyond titles. She looked for people who led with both competence and compassion. Within weeks, the board began to change. For the first time in the company's history, half of the board members were women. Several were under 40. Some came from industries the company had never touched before. Education, public health, even community development. Jessica wasn't just checking boxes. She was changing lenses. If we want to serve a diverse world, she said in one board meeting, we can't keep making decisions in a room full of the same voices. At the center of this new circle sat Richard Tanaka, her newly appointed strategic advisor. Richard was different. Sharp mind, yes, but more than that, a kind heart. He asked hard questions, but he listened harder. He didn't interrupt to impress. He paused to reflect. He'd spent years building collaborative models in non-profit systems. He once turned down a $1 million CEO role because the board refused to fund employee wellness programs. Jessica knew the kind of leader her father would have trusted. And she found him in Richard. In one of their first meetings, Richard turned to the board and said, "We're not here to protect power. We're here to distribute it. Leadership isn't scarce, it's shared. If we get that right, everything else follows." The room was still. But something shifted. The old board had been a wall, rigid, closed, risk-averse. They valued pedigree over perspective. They preferred dominance over dialogue. The new board. It was a circle. Ideas flowed. Perspectives clashed and then converged. Egos were checked at the door. And slowly, decisions became smarter. More grounded. More human. Jessica realized something simple, but powerful. Power built only on control is fragile. But power built on shared purpose and people. That kind of power can last. As the months passed, the company didn't just grow. It evolved. It became a place where difference wasn't tolerated. It was celebrated. Where titles didn't dictate respect. Actions did. And the boardroom that once echoed with politics and posturing, now it buzzed with ideas. Jessica looked around the table one morning, watching a former schoolteacher debate market strategy with a venture capitalist. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Because they weren't fighting for power. They were building something together. The conference hall was packed. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder. Engineers in hoodies, analysts in pressed shirts, even custodians and interns. Quiet, curious, unsure of what to expect. It was the first all-staff meeting since Jessica had returned. But this time, she wasn't there as Jessica from strategy. She stood at the podium as the new CEO. Not with a PowerPoint. Not with a script. Just her story. Her truth. She took a deep breath, looked out over the crowd, and began. "Some of you know me. Others only know what you've been told. But today, I want to speak not as a title, but as a person who's been exactly where many of you are." She paused, the room holding its breath. "A year ago, I was told I lacked leadership. That I wasn't what this company needed. But here's what I've learned. Leadership isn't about volume. It's not about who talks the most in meetings or who commands the most attention. Leadership is about vision. About listening. About lifting others up, even when no one's watching." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not of doubt, but recognition. People remembered how she had stopped by their desks. How she had asked, "What do you need?" and actually listened. How she had seen them when no one else did. Jessica smiled, not for effect, but because the moment felt real. "I didn't come back for revenge," she said softly. "I came back to rebuild something worth believing in. Something worthy of the people who never stopped trying, even when no one noticed. You are what makes this company great. And starting today, that greatness will never go unseen again." The applause wasn't loud, it was warm, genuine, the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention. It deserves it. Later that afternoon, Jessica took the long way back to her office. She passed through every department, stopped to laugh with the creative team, high-fived a marketing intern who just landed her first campaign. And near the break room, she saw a tray of cupcakes. Frosted, imperfect, homemade. "It's my last day," one intern said shyly. "So I baked something." Jessica took one, sat on the arm of the couch, and chatted with the group for 20 minutes about nothing important. And yet, it was everything. No hierarchy, no roles, just people. Together. Here's what she knew in her heart as she looked around that room. The greatest revenge isn't making them lose. It's building something so good, so strong, so real. They'll never again dare to underestimate you. Not because you said so, but because they finally see it for themselves. And with that, Jessica stood up, dusted off a bit of frosting and smiled. She wasn't just running a company now. She was restoring its soul. Thank you for staying with Jessica's story until the very end. If this journey moved you, made you reflect, or simply reminded you of your own strength, then it was worth telling. Because here's the truth. Sometimes life doesn't give us justice right away. But with patience, clarity, and the courage to rise again, we can rewrite the ending. So tell me, what's the lesson you took from this story? How did it make you feel? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them, and I know others will too. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, take care, and remember, sometimes the quietest ones are just waiting for the right moment to lead.